All yours, Mary.
All right, good morning. It's March 9th. This is the meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. It's 10:01 a.m. We do have a quorum present. I will start by reading the governor's announcement. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. For public participation, there is a raise hand button under the reactions section at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can send a chat to Vince or to me to let us know that you have a comment that you'd like to make. Or if it is a time when I have opened the floor for public comment, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know that you want to speak. Let's just be polite and hopefully we can manage the public comment without any difficulty. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller. Gary, you're on mute. Are you able to join us with audio? All right, we'll come back to Gary. Sarah Boyce?
Here.
Peter Brace?
Aye.
Graham Durovich?
Here.
I don't see Matt Fee yet. Ian Golding?
Here.
Jen Carberg?
Here.
Fritz McClure?
Here.
And I am Mary Longacre. Gary, are you able to unmute? Are you there? Okay, if you come and join us, Gary, right now we can see your name, but we cannot interact with you. All right, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And we do have a couple of guest speakers. Rob McNeil, good morning.
Good morning. Here.
And Kimberly Rose, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials have been provided. Members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move on to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Additionally, we do take public comment in advance of the meeting by email. Anyone is welcome to send a comment to vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov in order to submit a public comment. And finally, each vote in this meeting will be taken by a roll call vote. I do see Gary have joined us on the screen. Can you say good morning to us?
Morning.
And Matt Fee has also joined. Matt, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the first item on the agenda was the approval of minutes beginning with February 9th. Did anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes for February 9th?
Move approval. It's Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Hi, Rich McClure.
Vince, did you have a hand up? Sorry, I'm just adjusting my screen so I can see everybody.
Yes, Mary, just
Yes,
one
go ahead,
thing-
Vince.
Pardon, thank you. Just one thing to note, there was just one note here, the board moved approval of the brochure by unanimous vote, there was no vote. So I just want to strike that one if nobody objects.
I would agree with that. Does anybody have an objection to striking that comment?
No objection. I made the motion. That's fine.
Thank you, Matt. So we have a motion to approve the minutes with one sentence struck. And I'm sorry, did we have a second?
Second, Sarah
Thank
Boyd.
you, Sarah. So a roll call vote. No further discussion, I assume? Not seeing any. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter, you're on mute.
Aye.
Thank you. Graham Dervich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Yes.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Fritz, your video is off, just to make sure that you're aware of that.
No, I am, but I don't
Okay.
quite understand. If I look on my thing, it says either stop video. I'm afraid if I do anything, I'm gonna lose the whole thing, at least
Yeah.
unless I go out and come back in again.
So if you
while
have
you're
a
doing
comment, during the meeting, make sure you send me a chat or just shout out when you have a moment, because we can't see you raising your hand.
Well, you approve the other minutes. I think what I'm gonna do is go off and see if I can come back in.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Fritz.
Yeah.
All right, so second items, we have the meeting minutes from February 23rd. I did ask Vince to add a link to the recording of those minutes, which we normally do. I'm sorry, recording of the meeting, adding that link to the minutes. And I think I asked Vince to strike one sentence, if Vince, if you want to show that. That was a reference to a website to be included in the minutes, and we couldn't find that particular link. Those documents were sent out by email, not from a website. So we thought it best just to strike that sentence. Any further comments or corrections to the minutes? Not seeing any. Fritz is coming back in. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Graham. Roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Abstain.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Graham Dervich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. So we have 8-4 and 1 abstention. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is announcements. And again, just a reminder, if we have any live events coming up, and would members of the committee let Vince know if they're planning to attend, so that we can track whether or not we need to post for a quorum. Vince, would you tell us a little bit about the Natural Resources Department Planting Day coming up?
Sure thing, just give me 1 second. I'd like
Yep.
to share the agenda on screen so people can see it. So just, everyone can hear me okay? Thank you. So just so that everyone is aware, we're planning on a Natural Resources Planting Day for Wednesday, March 24th. This is something that I've been working on for about what would you say, Jen, about 1 year and 3 months, thereabouts. We received a permit from Concom for this in February of last year. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we didn't get to planting. Now we're getting to it this year, hoping to plant about 0.7 of an acre on the dunes by the bridge, by Millie's Bridge. If March 24th is a rainy day, we do have a rain delay day of March 25th, the Thursday. I wanted to mention this today because I wanted everyone to be aware about it. It's the day after the next crack meeting, so everyone's had at least 2 weeks notice. Jen, do you want to make any comment on it?
No, that was it, Vince. We're just excited to get plants in the ground.
Just to note, I have ordered half the stock. I have the grass, and I'm working with other companies on Ireland to try and get the rest of the bare root plants that will go in the ground. So at the very least, we're going to be doing grass planting on the day. And if we, I don't want to, and I never want to delay planting anymore. I'm done. I want to get this in the ground, but I haven't ordered the rest of the stock yet, partly so that everyone knows, partly so that Jen knows. And flagging a potential problem in the offing that hopefully so I will be able to rectify with surfing hydrangea today. And I can talk about that more with Jen afterwards if you need.
Thank you. It's a nice sign of spring that we're talking about planting. Next, the Nantucket Civic League will be
I'm sorry,
hosting.
I have
I'm sorry,
a
Sarah.
question. Sorry,
Yes.
I raised my hand.
Sorry.
That's okay. Vince, were you just announcing it, or were you asking for volunteers, or is there a solicitation for help? I'm just curious if you were seeking additional help.
Partly just so the crack members can ask questions if it comes up. We're going to have minimum 8 staff, 4 from Natural Resources Department, 4 from NCF. We're looking at maybe getting some more volunteers, but I have to clear up 1 or 2 things ahead of time. I don't have a solid answer to that yet. There's the first thing to understand is who the other volunteers might be. They might be some high school kids. So and that will be done through a cooperative thing with Mass Audubon, hopefully, if this will work out. The hang up and the hitch in this is that everyone will have to do a volunteer waiver and organize their own transport. And we must also understand that there aren't any issues with the numbers of gathering. I understand that the governor's order recently changed from 10 to 100. People can gather outdoors. So it shouldn't be that much of an issue. I just need to make sure the town doesn't have an issue with it.
Right, thank you. Any other comments on the planting? No, okay, so then the next announcement, the Nantucket Civic League will be hosting a forum. The title has changed. I think it's now Chapter 91, the Public Watershed Act, on Wednesday, March 24th from 3:30 to 5:30. That is unfortunately the same day as the planting, so I don't know when that might wrap up, but people might have a conflict with that. There is more information on the Civic League's website about that. Any questions on that forum or comments? Next one is we've had this announcement. Resilient Nantucket is coming up with the presentation April 23rd and 24th, and an HDC review this Friday, the 12th, which you can register for and participate. At the first HDC review, I noted that the coastal resilience plan was not mentioned in the guidelines, which is not. It doesn't necessarily need to be. The guidelines are specific to building adaptation. But I did suggest that they might reference the coastal resilience plan as a resource in those guidelines, and that it might have indications of which path an owner might want to take based on the risk assessment and so forth. So that may be incorporated into the revision. Then we have Kim Rose here from Acclimate. Acclimate maintains an event calendar for coastal resilience related events, and is also part of the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge speaker series. And I've asked Kim to give us just a very brief couple of highlights from each session. Those sessions are not open to the public live, but they are available recorded on the website as noted in the agenda. So Kim, we have one session from 10 days ago or so. Do you want to give us a couple of highlights from that might be pertinent to Nantucket?
Yeah, sure. So one of the speakers was Alan Schulman from the University of Miami School of Architecture, and he was the lead on the Miami Beach Buoyant City Report, which is available in the resources for the Envision Resilience Challenge, as well as on the Acclimate resources page as well, and I'll just drop that into the chat as well. But basically, it was just this conversation about how Miami is approaching planning for sea level rise. Of course, that city is very vulnerable, of course, and it's a major metropolitan area. Along with that, they also talked about a resource called Miami Beach Rising Above, which is basically a hub website for everything from protecting their watershed of Biscayne Bay to flood awareness, plastic-free movements, as well as their climate science, climate adaptation, and mitigation, which was a very interesting, it's a very well-designed website. It's very easy to move about. And I just dropped that link as well in the chat. And then the second speaker was Jennifer Wellick with the National Park Service. She was one of the authors of the Resilient Design Guidelines for Historic Buildings that the National Park Service just published in 2019. They are about to release the revised edition of that with images and visualizations and whatnot about what those approaches would look like. And so we're super excited for that because this is one of the first federal documents that addresses built environment adaptation and also mentions landscaping. But she had a really interesting point. One of the questions was in the program of, okay, well, what about relocation? Because I know a lot of people, when they think way into the future, like 2100, they're looking at managed retreat. And what would that, how would that affect historic buildings and that kind of thing? And her outlook on it was Nantucket has a history of moving buildings. Therefore, for Nantucket, the Park Service may not have as much of a holdback versus someplace that doesn't have that history. So that was a very interesting comment that she made during her talk. And that discussion is available on the speaker series website, which was the first link that I posted, but it's a very interesting talk. And then next week, the topic, sea level rise, flooding and living with water through design. And hearing from architecture and design professionals from Tulane University and UC Berkeley.
Thank you, Kimberly. One of the things that I remember being interested in the talk about Miami was the sort of negotiations they were thinking about in terms of floor area ratio, that if a building lost some interior space because they were adapting to flood measures, how could they allow that space to be recouped somewhere else, either on the lot or in the building? And that, I thought that was an interesting discussion that we may need to address here as well.
Yeah. It's a lot about trade-offs and how can you do this, but you can still maintain this and that kind of, it's a lot of the conversation of trade-offs.
All right. Thanks very much, Kim. And I look forward to having you tell us more about the speaker series at our next meeting.
Thank you.
And as she said, the speakers' presentations are recorded. It's a 2-hour commitment, so it does take some sitting and watching, which I'm sure we've all spent more than enough time sitting and watching screens. So it's hard to commit to 2 more hours. Any further questions on the announcements or other comments before we move on? Okay, seeing none, we have an update from Rob McNeil on plans for First Bridge, Second Bridge, North Cambridge Street Culvert, and Mattocket Ditch Works. Rob?
Thank you, Mary. Just want to check, Vince, can I do the screen share?
Already made you co-host. Yes, you can share.
Great, thank you. Okay. Give me the thumbs up if you can see that, Mattocket Harbor, Long Pond Estuary. So just to orient everybody who's probably more familiar with these areas than I am, using the 188 Mattocket campus as a reference where the landfill is located, we have the north head of Long Pond, what most people consider First Bridge, the culvert that's been replaced at this location on Mattocket Road. Mattocket continues around and has a second culvert here at Mattocket Ditch. And Mattocket Ditch then carries through under North Cambridge Street and ultimately out to Hither Creek and to Mattocket Harbor. A couple other points of note include, you can see the washover here at Ames Avenue or Millie's Bridge, where Vince and others will be planting grass out there at the end of the month. And also Massasoit Bridge here over Long Pond, connecting South Cambridge with Red Barn Road. And so it's, people generally recognize that the Long Pond itself is a great pond. It's 70 acre with the connection to the harbor. It's brackish, so it is tidally influenced. The history, I believe that the ditch itself was dug by the Wampanoag. And so there's been lots of discussions about how the culverts and or the ditch and other influences, both environmental and man-made, are contributing to influence the water quality of this specific estuary. And so there's been lots of studies ongoing. There's a study that looks at water quality for the pond and I think the greater piece of Mattocket in general, and has been the catalyst for discussions about sewering Mattocket. So our part in that is to monitor the landfill, as well as work with other departments that are taking a look at nitrogen loadings from development and from houses and other sources out in the Mattocket area that all contribute to water quality impairments along Long Pond. I will stop here and just quickly mention that Long Pond happens to be one of very few ponds on the island that are actually showing improvements, measurable improvements, which is really positive. And while I don't have actual facts to back up the contention, I believe, or that statement, I would say that I think the reduction in the overall size of the landfill for 10 years of mining operations and allowing the adjacent wetland system around the landfill to sort of take a deep breath and restore may have contributed substantially to the improvements of the pond's water quality. So that is sort of a long way to get to what is happening with the Mattocket culverts and the Mattocket ditch. So it's something that we've committed to. We've studied with our consultants, Fuss and O'Neill, along with Woods Hole Group. And so it's focused on water quality issues, as well as targeting the high nutrient loads and identifying sources that have been previously discussed and identified, and taking a look more meaningfully into that. Taking a look at the SMAS reports, and those get updated periodically, and we do contribute to those. I'll mention that the data into the SMAS report specific to the landfill has been, I would say, improved. We now electively test for nutrients around the landfill to inform that report. And at the latest version of that report has actually been able to downplay or show a significantly lesser role that the landfill plays with the nitrification and water quality concerns for the pond. So it helps us make that determination that we need to focus elsewhere if we're going to meaningfully improve the water quality of Long Pond and Mattocket Harbor moving forward. And that forces us back to the culverts. So a lot of things that CRAC discusses, we've looked at here, along with coastal flooding and storm surge and the modeling. We've taken a look at sea level rise and its influence, expected influence over this estuary system out a number of years. And again, as reference, this is the landfill campus, and this is Long Pond, the ditch, and Hither Creek. So Long Pond itself is only about 6 feet deep. As we mentioned, tidally influenced, but restricted, and restricted at these particular pinch points. Both the ditch starts to fill in over years, and the culverts are different hydraulically than the original bridges that were in that area. So part of that was to model what's there today and how that may be influenced with these different expected pressures over the next, I think, 50 or 100 years, and to see if updating or upgrading those culverts, whether it's upsizing or otherwise reconfiguring them, would make appreciable difference to the water quality of these areas. This is kind of a close-up if you're unfamiliar with these areas. North Cambridge Street, the culvert that's here. Matticat Road, this is Second Bridge looking down the ditch. Again, from the history books, Wampanoags originally dug this ditch in 1665, along with the early settlers to the island. So we're looking at culvert 1, culvert 2, culvert 3, and modeling that with our folks at Woods Hole Group. So this has been done, and what came back was essentially that the condition of these systems were in good shape. There's some minor notes in here regarding the condition. However, everything is functioning well. This just gets through some of the field collection data, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I will say that there's analysis that shows some restricted flow, and this analysis that shows less restrictive flow in certain other areas. With the results of the report, we ended up going out and looking to try to get essentially these culverts replaced and upsized. And in doing that, we chased a couple different grant opportunities because this report was originally put out in March of 19. We went after a CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant initially, followed by a MVP action grant. And the good news was in both of those efforts, we received favorable responses, although we did not get the grant funding. We received some really good responses and feedback from both grant funders. And we believe that this project, when it finally is designed, will be a really good candidate for construction funding moving forward. So we do intend to go back and continue to attempt to try to get some of this effort, particularly the construction effort, funded through grant monies, or at least partially funded through grant funding. There's a big laundry list of people, and I should say agencies, that will need to take a look at this effort and to determine whether or not what we're trying to do here, update these culverts and dredge Matticat Ditch to improve the flow. What part of that is permittable? And are there restrictions to consider? And there's so many overlapping jurisdictions involved with this. We have set up a meeting coming up soon to get all these parties together on Zoom and to basically hash out any concerns that may conflict so that our consultants and the town people involved will have a clear path on getting this project done. I think the big change that has really influenced discussions on how this is going to play out in the future result around Matticat Road being really the only major public way that carries traffic to and from that whole side of the island. So we are taking a look at, inundation maps and looking at other alternative routes because, this route, as ancient as it is, developed out of convenience rather than long-term planning with any idea of sea level rise influence. So we are taking a look at a combination of things here with the estuary being the primary focus, but access to Matticat, both long-term and short-term, being a focus as well. Again, there's 32 pages of summary data, but I'd like to open it up to questions to get some additional feedback or any concerns from the committee before I take off.
Sarah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I really appreciate the summary, and I'm interested to look at the report more in depth myself, just out of curiosity and being involved with Long Pond. And one of the questions was, how could we as the committee assist? We see grant opportunities come up, like a Fish and Wildlife Service grant, RFP. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback all of a sudden. Okay, so would it be helpful for us to help identify grant opportunities? Is that the stumbling block right now for continuing with the culvert improvement? I'm just, wanting to see how we can facilitate some of this work and planning.
Thank you, Sarah. I would say that the stumbling block is certainly not grant opportunities, but we are always looking for, and our consultants, frankly, are really adept at matching up projects with potential funding sources. But, there's always new ones that we've seen quite a few new opportunities get launched at the state level, specifically in the last year or so. They come out and sort of are repackaged in a new, exciting way that seems to be tied with a lot of the goals that some of these projects set out to do. So the short answer is, if the committee could forward potential grant opportunities as reminders through Vince, those are always helpful. But I would say that our consultants are pretty well adept and working for other clients as well through a lot of these programs. So they kind of take a look at what we're up to and match it up even before we start. We did chase the grants initially, I think mostly because we were hopeful that they would fund the second phase of this, which was going from the modeling stage to actual design work. The fact that we didn't make it through 2 grant opportunities just told us that we needed to fund the design ourselves and then have it essentially shovel ready to go, and then go back and look for some grant opportunities again, maybe the same pot of money. So that's where we're at right now. The current contract we have with Fuss & O'Neill and Woods Hole Group is essentially to foster this massive Zoom effort with all the regulators to get everybody's opinions out there and to identify potential conflicts between the different jurisdictions, and then put together a proposal for what the design effort's going to be. And that's expected to occur over the next year.
Great, thanks.
Peter, go ahead, and then Jen.
Yeah, Rob, two things. Just wondering when the last time the ditch was cleaned out. And then also, given the height of the road at Matticat Road and then North Cambridge Street, and also our not knowing how high the water is going to come up. We have our predictions, but we don't, obviously can't confirm them. I'm just wondering if you're going to have to raise the road. Is that something you guys consider? Roads?
Thank you, Peter. So definitely, yes, we consider road profiles in all of this. The initial thought is to raise the roads in the vicinity of each of the crossings as part of this project, and then set the stage for future profile improvements that would probably come in or around sewering efforts to fill out the rest of it. But that's kind of just the conceptual thoughts on that today. And I know the environmental impacts largely along the entire stretch of Matticat Road would need to be considered. And there's a lot of similar efforts that are occurring, going through permit efforts now at other areas of the state that we can learn from how those can best be designed, which are taking sea level rise into account. The first part of that question was with regard to cleaning of the ditch. I'm in my 5th year now, and I know it has not happened in my tenure, but the ditch itself, and the last slide I left up here does identify specific locations that have accumulated sediments that have been identified by the consultant in the field. That would be part of that effort to ditch. It's my thought that we would clean the entire ditch and get it permitted so that it could occur on some regular basis to ensure that flow continues. I think it's really going to be a matter of what that is going to include. Is there a spoils plan? There will be a spoils plan, et cetera. So there's a lot of complex pieces to it that I think in today's permitting arena are quite different than what previous department heads might have had to deal with. So it'll be a little bit different than what people are used to, I believe.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Rob, for presenting this to us. It really is a big, complex project with a lot of moving pieces. Part of my question you just answered with the raising of the roads, thinking of sea level rise, if we're going to impact the marshes by replacing culverts, considering doing the road raising at the same time. But connected to that also was there a consideration for, instead of replacing culverts, actually raising those roads with bridges, which would more facilitate the flow of water with higher tides and storm events? The culverts themselves, no matter their size, create a restriction when you get extreme tide events. And if you would raise the road and actually do, restoration of the marsh underneath, you could get surface flow coming through versus that road restriction. And adjacent to that, the idea of having culverts in place actually causes erosion of those salt marshes, and then you've got, less buffering capacity. So that was one question. I have another one after it, but the first question was whether or not you considered, actual bridges as opposed to culverts.
Sure. Thank you, Jen. Absolutely. There's really nothing off the table at this point. I think recognizing that with rising sea level rise, as well as storm influences, we're seeing storms that are more frequent and more intense than ever. And that flow needs to be accommodated. To your point, regardless of the size, there will be some restriction, whether it's a culvert or even as a bridge. That gap will still have some kind of restriction into it. So we will be working with again, with all the regulators as well as our design consultants to come to a best case scenario, as well as, factor things in such as bridge design. We've worked with Vince and the Mattocket Conservation Association folks in recently looking at Millie's Bridge as well as Massasoit Bridge. So a lot of these same discussions came up, just to a lesser degree, because there's not as much flow in those areas, hopefully. But the reality is, we may end up with a washover scenario at Millie's that could be quite a nightmare to deal with, or it will at some point. So flow is certainly a major concern and something that we will take into account. I definitely recognize that the committee has a lot of expertise, and I'm looking forward to having some really good feedback from the committee as we move forward, particularly with regard to the planting of the marsh or the disturbance of the marsh, as well as how the marsh is expected to change with the sea level rise that's expected to come.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And then I had one more question. I just wonder if the modeling that Fuss & O'Neill and Woods Hole did, was there any discussion of potentially even restoring the ditch so that there wasn't flow from Long Pond out to Mattocket Harbor? And I know that's maybe a separate question from what that would do for water quality, but just the idea that if there isn't a direct flow connection between the two and through that salt marsh in there, would that potentially change or mitigate sea level rise and perhaps, I don't know, reduce the flooding that we see in the future? I just didn't know if there was a scenario where that was considered as a restoration piece if we restored that ditch so there wasn't a direct flow through of water, and instead if water's coming through, it's moving through a whole intact salt marsh instead.
Another good question. I would say under the scenarios that we ran, none of them considered closing the ditch, and we will certainly raise that for discussion purposes. I can tell you that at least initially, I had to laugh and tell the town manager that so my first select board meeting going on 5 years ago was with an outgoing select board member that was absolutely convinced that Mattocket Ditch and the restricted flow through it was to blame for the water quality issues in the pond. And so to a large degree, that was corroborated in this 2019 study. And so I did give Bob a call and told him, hats off, that in fact, we had a professional model that confirmed his hunch. So, this is something that, again, was historically has a origination sometime in the mid 1600s and has been working for the town since then. So I think it can certainly be discussed. Like I said, everything's on the table, and some ideas like this certainly are interesting. I don't know is the short answer. I don't know what that would look like, but we're happy to look at it.
Yeah, this was kind of the first time I had thought about it, but talking about all the regulations you would have to go through to do the work out here, the trend is to move towards salt marsh ditch restoration versus dredging. And so that, is kind of just a thought I had, wondering if that would potentially be an improvement in the future versus trying to maintain, something that we had done to the landscape long-term. It might not be a short-term answer, but, just wondering if it was a long-term one.
Sure, we can take a look at it.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jen. Other comments or questions? Right, seeing none from community members, I will open it up to the public. If you have a comment or question on this presentation from Rob, please unmute yourself and ask a question. Deanne, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I'm not sure whether this question is for you, Rob, or for Vince, but what is the role of the Arcadis consultants in this area? Will they be looking at some of these challenges and making recommendations as part of the overall coastal resilience plan?
So
Vince, if you'll address that.
thank you. I can take part of that at any rate. So this is an existing plan of sorts. It's still somewhat in a development phase, as I understand. Rob can correct me on that one. I have mentioned its existence to Arcadis. They know about it. They know about building it into models. But for realistic purposes, I know this is somewhat tidally influenced. This is something that has already in some ways been addressed and come from the HMP as well, noted as a problem. The Coastal Resilience Plan, everyone knows that this is an area that floods and it's got a tidal influence, so it'll be part of it. So I think the best thing for the Coastal Resilience Plan is to know about it and build on it. But it's an existing plan, so not much more we can do other than that.
Thank you, Vince. Rob, you're still sharing your screen. And yeah. Were there other members of the public that had a question before we move on, or anything else from committee members? Matt?
Yeah, just I had some of the same questions Jen had. Do you fill it in and do you put a road over it? You know, in a road that can be raised, I think, you know, and I know Rob's looking at that. And my other comment is when you look at the flood tides, I wonder whether we want to put 15, 16, $20 million into buildings, or whether we want to, you know, sort of double down on a landfill, or whether we should be looking at Mid-Island and finding a way to, you know, do we want to hard armor the landfill at some point? You know, and those are discussions I've brought up, and Rob is aware of them at the select board level. We're looking at sort of what is the next 50 years of you know, sort of waste removal look like, and how do we make sure that we aren't impacted by sea level rise, even if we close that location? And those are all on the table.
Thank you, Matt. I'll just add, Rob, if you could share that presentation with Vince so we can include it in our minutes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Jen, you have a comment?
I did. Thank you, Mary. I just wondered while we had Rob here, if I could ask a quick question about the culverts along Pulpus Road, and just thinking coastal resilience. I know that everything out there has been flagged, and I just wanted to know if we had any update on what's, you know, what is happening with culverts out there on Pulpus Road, if that was a chance to ask that question while he's here.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's top secret.
All right, never mind. Forget I asked.
Pulpus, while in it, thanks for noticing. We actually have an effort to do essentially a condition assessment and replacement for all those culverts, starting at I'll call it Turtle Pond for the locals, all the way to the gatehouse at Wallwinnet. So those are a series of cross culverts that were installed way back, I believe, pre-1950. And a lot of them had been either extended or modified when the Pulpus bike path was put in, I believe in the 70s or 80s. And so many of them, if you've noticed over the last few years, we've spent a lot of time trimming out the culverts and exposing the head walls and really being able to get in there to take a look at the condition of these culverts. Some of them were not functioning well and were overflowing wetland systems into other contributing culverts. So it's really a matter of taking a look at the inventory that we're responsible for. And right now, rather than doing them one at a time, we elected to put them all together, package them all together, get them permitted all together for replacement, and to essentially have the designers look at upgrading these to the modern stream crossing standards wherever possible. And it's a real win for the environment in that we'll be not just moving the water through as in a better with the changing climate, but we'll also be accommodating critter movement, which is something that is more of a modern change to taking a look at just the convenience of moving water for public safety for humans. You're talking about, 3-sided box culverts and that sort of thing to allow low velocity movements and for a terrestrial movement of creatures through there as well. So it should be a huge improvement along the entire corridor.
Fritz has a question,
Rob.
and then so do I. Fritz, go ahead.
Thank you. Rob, just how does the culvert replacement in that areas, but you also have low road near the, in the same areas, the roads are low near the Life Saving Museum, and then further out toward Sconset, across from the pond where there's already been spillover onto the roadway and lost part of the roadway. It is raising those road areas something that is being considered long-term?
Thanks, Fritz. Those particular areas, Sacajah Pond and Folgers Marsh along Pulpus Road, have been specifically identified in our hazard mitigation plan. I'd like to say that the Folgers Marsh effort was further along, but we relied on a private citizen who stepped forward to fund the engineering of that location. And we've been patiently awaiting the outcome. I have been coordinating with the engineer for that project. And to give you a sense of where they're at, the culvert there would be dramatically increased in size, and the roadway would be raised, I believe, greater than 3 feet. So there's some pretty substantial changes that are needed in that specific area. I am currently working with Jeff at Natural Resources to take a look at Sacajah Pond and the hazard mitigation plan out in that specific area of Pulpus does speak to turning that area into a raised causeway somewhere in the future. You may or may not be aware that there's 3 major culverts that connect the wetland system to the sort of southwest to Sacajah Pond. Those were opened and flow restored following the storm event back in 2018 that caused the road to wash out. But a combination of things, including the perpetual height of the water out there and the ongoing wave action that is attributed to the high water, all contribute to keeping those culverts pretty well blocked up. So there's not a really regular or constant exchange on both sides of the road. So one of the goals there is to really work to manage the pond in trying to maintain a more consistent elevation to prevent wave action from doing damage to the public infrastructure, and at the same time just be more consistent with the ecological concerns out there. Part of that planning right now involves introducing some wave attenuators into the pond itself, these concrete bay balls that ultimately also serve as a shellfish home, I would say. So it's a living shoreline project ultimately that's being worked on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just generally curious, are there more areas of the island where we have culverts that might need an eye to restoring water flows?
Probably. To be honest, Mary, there is so much going on. We're really focusing on the low-hanging fruit first. I know another one that I'm in touch with the state on is Milestone Culvert out by the golf course. That's another concern of mine. So we're working together with them to try to get a condition assessment of that major culvert, as a for instance.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
Just as someone who's more likely to be in a vehicle on the road than in a marsh beside one, I never really think about culverts. I just don't even know they're there. So it's an interesting topic.
Well, I would say most of what Public Works touches is in that same category. A lot of people just rely on making sure that it's there and functioning, and we hear about it when they're not. So it's it's a good thing that we're discussing these, and I'm sure as we go, there'll be lots more to talk about. But it's helpful to ask those questions, and I appreciate the committee's paying attention to these things as they see them out there, because I'm happy to highlight them and bring them up, because getting input and making sure that we're on the right track is important.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Sure, thank you.
If there are no further comments or questions, we'll move on to the next part of this presentation, and that was an update from Vince. At our last meeting, we had talked about asking Rob to give us more information about TIP funding and whether any projects were ready for that. And Vince and Rob had some conversations, and Vince did some research. So Vince, if you'll let us know what came out of that.
Thank you very much, Mary. So as Fritz mentioned this day 2 weeks ago, he gave the committee a great update on the Transport Improvement Grants, TIP grants, Transport Improvement Program grants. And I said I was going to contact Rob, which I did. In essence, just to synthesize it down to its most basic point, once I spoke to Rob, he said DPW is only really involved once this would come to the implementation phase more than anything. I went off, contacted many other people, mostly in Plus, and I ended up speaking with Andrew Vorse. He is very interested in these, but ultimately has a problem. He doesn't have anyone to run it. The town does not have a transport coordinator at the moment. The previous transport coordinator, Mike Burns, left some months ago, as I understand. So then I was trying to understand more about how these grants are put together and how to apply for them. So effectively, we need a transport coordinator first before we can go and apply for one of these grants. The transport coordinator then needs a plan, and a developed plan, and something that is pretty much application ready. So something that's designed at least to concept phase or a bit more. And then that person can then apply for a grant and then manage it afterwards. Unfortunately, we're missing the two important components. We don't have a plan and we don't have a coordinator. So unfortunately, Plus isn't able to move forward with any TIP grants this year. I'm already at capacity. I can't take on the application for something else that's particularly outside of my field, just so that I can put a resilience part into it. I wish I could, believe me, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do a TIP application this year.
Thank you, Vince. Nice try. Any comments or questions for Vince on that? No, seeing none. So the next item on our agenda is the final review of the draft of our homeowners brochure, which was created originally by the Education Subcommittee. That was sent out in the packet. Vince, can you put that on the screen? We had some tweaks that were requested after our last meeting. I think we've accomplished those. Just want to make sure that if there are any other suggestions, people have an opportunity to raise them. And if there are no further changes, then we can vote to adopt this. Comments or questions from anyone? Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. I think this looks great. I love that the clouds are now raining. And I think the color scheme is really good. And I don't have any issues with anything on here. And so the one comment I have is really, I don't want it to delay the creation of the brochure. But if you notice on this page that Vince just put up on the upper right corner, there's a big blank space there. There's a really nice spot that we could say something. And so not to, I don't want to belabor it and go back and forth with Florencia again, but I think that since this is like the one thing that we're putting out as a committee, but, aside from the ultimate plan, it would be nice to have something there. But I was just thinking about this morning. And so the few thoughts I had were, if there is interest in putting anything there, wasn't to be so wordy, but just to say something along the lines of these are recommendations. I don't want it, and I don't know what else to say there, but it was kind of, because there's a big blank space, it'd be nice to put something there. And I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that. If there's not a ton of interest in it, then I would say we just move forward with it as is.
Vince, you have a comment?
Thank you, Mary. So just kind of to speak to what Sarah is saying, I appreciate the point entirely. This information that's on the bottom bar, we originally asked for it to be in this space. Florencia created it as a bottom bar, either for her own artistic reasons I can't explain. I'm not an artist, but that was the original intent. So that's one suggestion.
Other comments?
How about a seagull with Vince's face on it, flying over?
Now,
Not you
Matt.
chasing me.
Yes, Ian.
So with the greatest respect, Sarah, I sort of like the fact that it isn't absolutely chock-a-block full with stuff that you're trying to look at. So I am a seagull or two, I guess, but it doesn't affect me the way that it does you.
Other comments? I would tend to say that having the blank space emphasizes the rest of it. And if the entire page was filled with text, then your eye wouldn't know where to land. So I'm not generally in favor of adding more at this point. It's already extremely busy. And we do have at the top that these are recommendations. That could be clearer, certainly, but I'm happy with it as it stands. Other comments, Matt?
We need a vote to move this along.
Yeah, we would take a vote to accept this brochure as final, and then the question would be, what do we do with it after that? So do you want to make a motion to accept this?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Gary, thank you. And any further discussion?
Sure.
Yes, Ian.
Thanks, Mary. But one of the reasons I like it open like that is because my eye naturally moves up to sea level rise. So for me, it actually, by leaving it open, it emphasizes one of the key aspects of this. And I just wanted to put that in. So it wasn't only an aesthetic consideration when I made that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any further discussion before we go to a vote? All right, seeing none. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Graham Durovich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carber,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. So that is adopted unanimously. So the question is, where does it go from here? Vince, do we need to get approvals from other town agencies? Or Matt? Sorry, go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Mary. Apologies. We've already checked with who we needed to check. We checked with the building department. They had no issues. This is now a cracked document. I don't think we need to check with Select Board or anyone else. The only information on here is Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and links to websites that already exist. This is in keeping with pretty much everything else that we need. I don't think we need to take it to Select Board or anything, unless you want a blessing, but that's a committee chair's decision.
Comments from the rest of the committee? I think we would present it to the select board as an accomplishment, not necessarily for approval. Sarah, you had a comment?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking, I wasn't here for the last meeting, so I don't know if there was more discussion about the potential rollout, but if we, present it at a select board meeting, and then it's obviously on the website, it would be great to be able to share it through social media. And I know that the CRAC committee doesn't have a social media account, so is there a sort of rollout plan, or what normally happens with some things like that are produced from committees like this?
And I would have to assume that we'd be under the umbrella of the Natural Resources Department for this. And they do have a social media account, so they could roll it out for us in that way. And then the other question is, if it was printed on paper, how would we distribute it as opposed to electronically? Vince, you have a comment on that?
So I was talking internally about how that would work. My first idea was this could potentially be emailed to the stakeholder group that we already have. It's in a format that can be emailed. When it comes to printing, we have some amount of money, not much. We could probably get 200-300 printed on nice paper stock here on island for not a major amount of money. What's it called? Don't remember the name of the company that the town uses. Either way, it's something that we've done before and could probably do again for just a minor amount of money.
And then if it was printed, where would it be? And maybe the answer is more when rather than where, so that people would actually be able to see it, get it. I don't think the town agencies are open to the public yet. So there's no point in putting flyers on desks. Any ideas about how we might distribute it? Yes, Gary?
Is there any chance that we could have it as an insert when the quarterly tax bills go out, so all of the taxpayers get it?
I'm going to guess that that's unlikely because it's a third party that handles that mailing under contract, and to increase the weight or to increase the handling that they have to do is probably outside the scope of the contract. That's a complete guess on my part. But yes, I wish that was an avenue that was more easily available. But that would also mean printing thousands. Gary?
When you say we could only get a few hundred printed, that is so minimal compared to the way we'd really like to get the message out there. Isn't there a way that we could have thousands printed, not just hundreds?
Vince, any suggestions?
So you change the quality basically, Gary. So the ones I can print here in my office would be just like this, nice and fine. I can fold them and do all the necessaries with them, but it wouldn't be on good paper stock. It wouldn't be professionally done. Have to make that obvious. But I don't think I could print thousands of them here within Natural Resources Department. That's usually something that is handled by an outside firm. Poets Corner is what I was trying to remember earlier.
So I suppose one option would be if one wanted to fund the printing of them as a gift to the town. That would always be a potential way of getting them done. Yes, Graham?
I think we should start with the email distribution, especially given what we're up against with public health things right now. And then if we find an opportunity where we have a captive audience that might be interested in an actual paper brochure, we could go down that avenue and explore that further. But right now it doesn't seem like we have a place to distribute paper brochures right now.
That's a good point, Graham. If we do have an in-person public event, we should definitely have these on hand for that at some point in the future. Peter?
And I don't know what the budget is, but if you could get an ad in the Inky, I don't know if they would do it for free, probably not. Also Nantucket Magazine for the issue when the most people are here on the island. And of course, there's a link there that you can actually download the brochure, something like that. And then yesterday's island, just strategically placed at the right time of the year when there's a lot of people here, and you don't have to, I mean, who knows, maybe they'd run it for free, I don't know, but you know, it's one thing.
So that's a really interesting point, is that there are print distribution channels. And it just occurred to me as you were talking, Peter, this potentially could be printed as a tear out page in a glossy magazine that, you know, you would fold into a trifold at home, or just leave as 8.5 by 11, whatever. That's something we could pursue. I would love to see the magazines run articles on the coastal resilience plan and, you know, what's going on in Nantucket for coastal resilience. I think, Sarah, did you have a hand up?
Can I just,
sorry.
Go ahead, Peter.
and I'm sure everyone knows that Jason Graziadei is moving from the hospital to Nantucket Magazine, and I know the reason they're doing that is because he's going to do more news, more of a newsy nature, as opposed to placating the tourists and the wealthier people on the island. And since he wrote for the Yankee and he has that news sense, you might make an appeal to him to, you know, drop an idea in Rob Cacuzo's mind. He's the editor, that this is a story that needs to be done. And then with that story, this could run in that issue.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a great idea. So we had Sarah, and then Gary, and then Fritz.
So not as flashy as N Magazine, but I write for Yesterday's Island, and I often cover the coastal resiliency aspects of the island. And so I think if there's an interest in, you know, I mean, obviously I'm interested in putting this out there, but if you do decide, if this committee decides to advertise with Yesterday's Island, we could time something, or I could just put a link to it in the it's a, you know, Yesterday's Island is printed, but it also is digital. And so they found, since COVID, a lot of people read it digitally because it's free. So links do work from those articles. So just putting that out there. I'm happy to do that if there's a particular time that works, other than me just deciding.
Okay. And then we had Gary.
And when you were talking about social media, does that suggest that maybe a Daybreak, which appears every day, could use that as a link? Just say that, you know, CRAC has come out with this guide, and if you want a copy of it, click here. And at the same time, the Yankee has one of those news condensations regularly in the coming out in its email very frequently, and they could also use that as a link. So those are two areas where people could look, see that we produce something like this, click on the link, and then get a copy for themselves.
Thank you, Gary. And Fritz.
Just a thought, annual town meeting. I don't know whether we want to, excuse me, usually numerous handouts as you go into the building, whether it might be useful if we had some available there, although you don't know how many. I mean, you could have several hundred, more than several hundred needed if everybody picked them up, but I'm guessing not everybody's going to pick it up. So it's just a question of whether you might want to have some at annual town meeting.
Fritz, I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Matt, do you know if there will be any paper handouts at town meeting this year?
I have no idea. I'm not sure. The other opportunity might be the building department, you know, for either online with a link, you know, if we're not planning that, or once people go back inside, they could hand it out. And sometimes mailings go out through the town clerk's office. They send things out. I'm not sure if this would be able to be included or not, but occasionally they do mailings too. So either of those.
Thank you, Matt.
Mary?
Yes, go ahead, Fritz.
Just a thought to expand on it. We might give some thought, if we want visibility or other things that we might have to bring to the attention of certainly year-round residents, some sort of, call it a booth, but frequently there are groups that have a table, and we might have somebody there at the table with information. Could be studies, it could be the brochure. I mean, a lot of possibilities, but just the question of whether we want to put any time and effort into some sort of a display or table at annual town meeting.
Thank you, Fritz. And again, just sparked another thought for me, and that is if there are events this fall, the Island Fair, the Cranberry Harvest Festival, perhaps we can get either within the committee or within the community volunteers to sit at a table with information about the Coastal Resilience Plan, with this brochure, with whatever else we want to get to the public. That will be hopefully just after the Coastal Resilience Plan is delivered. So that's something we should be thinking about is, if there are events this fall that offer that in-person opportunity, how can we take advantage? Vince?
Yeah, happy to do that. I did that last year for Island Fair and happy to continue for this year. And just to speak to Fritz's point that if there's anything anything that I'm allowed to put in for handouts for town meeting, I will. I just have to make sure that it's COVID safe.
Great. So we have as strategies, email it out to the stakeholders list. And I would say with the request that they further distributed to members of their group, whatever that might be. We have working with the various media outlets to request that they help us get this out to the public. I don't think we have an advertising budget that we can draw on for that. We have handing out paper at town meeting, if that's allowed, potentially putting it at the building department whenever the public is allowed back into that building. And also the potential to ask the town clerk if there are mailings that we could piggyback on. Did I miss anything with that list? Graham?
We haven't discussed this, but town manager's newsletter, I don't know if she includes things from, select board work groups or groups that like we are advisory committees, but perhaps through natural resources that could be done.
That's great. If they could actually include the images from the brochure rather than just a link announcing it and saying, go download it here, that would be fantastic. Vince, you're on that for us?
I love the idea, Graham, and I'll get straight on to Florencia about it. And I imagine she'll want to put it in because she did all the background work.
Yes, that's true. and again, one more time, thank you, Florencia, very much for the hard work that she did to create this for us, especially when she has so much other work that needs to be done. We all really appreciate that. So are we ready to move on? I don't think, we did the vote to accept the brochure. So I think we're good on that point. Anything further? Is there any public comment on the brochure? We'll pause for a moment for that. And if not, then Vince has a demonstration for us of the meeting in a box kit that is being provided by Arcadis for the Coastal Resilience Plan. So Vince, I hope we left you enough time. We're down to 40 minutes.
Plenty time. I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that there's, I got one set of questions about the brochure from a lady on the call, Ava, and she might be gone now. Ava Rollins was on the call.
I don't see her now. Yeah.
She sent some questions. Most are to do with water quality, so not directly related to to coastal resilience. There was one about landscaping with native vegetation. Sarah might be able to say straight off the bat, we had planned for that one next potentially. And a question about soils. Require separation of soils and require remediation of 100% of soil post-construction. I'm not sure what to say or do about that question. I've been communicating with Ava for several weeks since the January open house, and I'll continue to cooperate with her on that, but I don't think any of this actually directly relates to it at all. Okay, next presentation. So, beg your pardon. I have 6 documents, 3 that I want to show everyone. Another 3 are identical, but in Spanish. Please just give me one moment to find the correct document. So, as you might have seen from the agenda, Arcadis have prepared something that we talked about very early on, about meeting in a box. Another name for it that was used previously in crack meetings was meeting in a bag. Same thing, but this is a virtual meeting toolkit for anyone that wishes to undertake a meeting on their own. This is for anyone in the public that wants to do it, but this is also a pretty sweet resource for any crack members that want to organize meetings for themselves with their groups or within their own boards, committees, commissions, or outside groups such as NCF or Linda Laring, if anyone wants to. In fact, this has already been a suggestion that this might be something that I might do with Linda Laring in the next couple of weeks. So this comes in this presentation. I'm going to show it to you as a PDF rather than as a PowerPoint, but it's available as a PowerPoint so that anyone can give it. It's in 3 sections essentially. There's a title slide, then there's about 3 slides that explain for the person that's going to be giving the presentation what to talk about, what the benefits of this presentation are. Then there's 15-ish, 16-ish slides, presentation materials that most people on this committee will have seen at least once, if not multiple times. Some new information, but largely stuff that has been presented many times. The 3rd section is then feedback. So how to collect and send feedback back to Arcadis so that they can understand who's given the presentations, the questions, the things that were talked about, and how to what was discussed, and so that they can use that as feedback into the CRP. So just to very quickly run through it, I'm not going to give this presentation. I hope people don't mind, but this is more the structure of how it works than anything else. So you'll have a title slide, then you can delete out these ones for yourself when you're giving it. This is just basically the self-guided meeting. There's a form here for putting the information into a Google document, and then this is a link to the CRP website. Then just how to organize your meeting, how to get everyone on board, sending out a Zoom link, all that kind of stuff. Thinking about who's involved and what information you might want to do. Biggest thing is on the next slide about the organization of it. This is the 3 sections I talked about. An introduction, organize for yourself, then 20 minutes of presentation and 20 odd minutes of discussion. Biggest part of it that Trevor's put in here is to have fun and enjoy it. So this will all seem somewhat familiar. I'm going to go through it quickly. If anyone wants to stop me and ask questions along the way, by all means, please do. Standard statement we've seen many times before. Presenters can read that one out. What is the CRP? Going through the typical things that we and this committee, the people in this committee know extremely well at this point. Principles, some of the organization of how it's going to come together, previous materials, risks. By the way, where's Gary? There he is, your house. This is looking straight down Willard. The picture I took, what would have that been, December, I think, just showing images around the island, getting people to understand what's going on. Some more of the risks, looking at floods today and into the future. This is 2070. Looking at it in the downtown area, same thing, just zoomed in today, 2100 in this case. Talking more about erosion, the various, I'm just going to keep scrolling if nobody minds. This is just all stuff we've done before. Then this is about creating a toolkit. This more about what can be done, methods that we can implement. How to create new policies, providing a detailed roadmap. How will the CRP team continue to work together? This is more the engagement, but this is now where we get back into how people can give feedback. This is more or less the end of the presentation. Talking about the Iris app. Then there's these storytelling cards, which I'm going to show after this. The storytelling card has been slightly updated, and I'm going to, these images in this bottom right corner for both of these ones are not correct anymore. Then to get into the discussion stage, this is planned to be about 20-25 minutes, and you can use the link to fill in answers on Google Docs for feedback. Simple questions that we've seen. Some of these are taken directly from things that were brought up at the virtual open house or modified based on people's concerns after the virtual open house. You get to ask about what you're worried about for flooding and erosion. What measures do you think should be taken? what neighborhoods are at risk, and we'll see a lot of the same things again. But you'll see, if you're one of the people giving this presentation, people tend to name their own neighborhoods all the time, something we're fairly familiar with at CRAC meetings to some extent. This is something that I've asked for. What do you value most about living in Nantucket? So it's kind of the personal feedback, it's the personal information, that what's your Nantucket experience, so to speak. What changes do you want to see for yourself and future generations? Trevor really likes that one. What are the most important features of the resilience and adaptation approaches? Just continuing the conversation and then thank them, and you get to upload all of these answers to Google Docs and you can do it live. So that's part one. To help presenters, there is also, I got to stop sharing and find the right document, I beg your pardon now. There's also a list of frequently asked questions, and this will help people answer those questions. This was to aid presenters, but this is also stuff that's kind of largely on the town website anyway. So this is just simple things. What is the Coastal Resilience Plan? This is what, 4 pages long. What is the resilience? Talks about the cycle. I had asked for a graph to be in there, but it never made it in. Who is involved in the CRP? Talking about all the people that are working on it. The stakeholders should be in here too. Hazards facing Nantucket, what factors drive sea level rise, talking about all this. And this is something, by the way, that I'm very happy to make available to everyone here. Asking if the CRP will impact me, yes, is the basic answer. And then how, talking about project timelines and what would be the outcomes of the CRP. This is, and then how to get involved and the apps and that kind of discussion. This is something that I'm happy to send to everyone after this meeting. The third thing that I want to talk about is this. I've just got to share the correct screen again. Trevor worked to develop these storytelling cards. Everyone able to see this all right? There's 2 questions on the storytelling cards. So my Nantucket is, and then people can draw a picture, write a little paragraph or do a poem or put in basically any piece of information they want in relation to coastal resilience and for flooding and erosion and sea level rise. That's what we're asking for. We'll probably get a lot more and more varied impacts. There's also one thing I want to make everyone aware of on this page. On the bottom right hand corner, what was it, Wednesday of last week, I finally got the town to agree to a logo for coastal resilience for Nantucket. So this is new, and this is the first place it's being used. The second one of these is, let's scroll down. In the future, my Nantucket will be. It's asking the same people what this would be in the future. So for this particular one, this is going to be printed and made available in some town buildings. I'm also going to try and work with some people in the high school and make this into a backpack flyer. One of the people I'm hoping to work with, but haven't approached yet, must say, is Ashley Erzman. So I'm going to try and work with some of the science teachers in the high school. It is one of my plans for this one. Also happy to give this to everyone in this committee to print and distribute as they wish. This can then be scanned via the QR code, and then you can just take a picture and give the feedback virtually as needed. So there's the 3 new documents. The other big thing to say about them is there's 3 of them, but there's actually 6. All of these are also in Spanish. The FAQs, the presentation, and this storytelling card. There's an awful lot in it. I'm happy to, so the plan for this now is first I'm going to see if there's any feedback and questions, and then if there's nothing too drastic, what I had been talking over with Trevor is to do a mass emailing tomorrow, whereby we talk about the Iris app and also the presentation and storytelling cards.
Vince, one of the things that I noticed there under share your vision at the bottom of the card, it says be sure to share via social media using the hashtag Resilient Nantucket and ACT Together. Shouldn't that be ACT Local to go along with the campaign?
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Oh, I must also apologize to committee members. I only had the presentation available to me to send out. I didn't get the FAQs until yesterday. So does anyone want to look at the presentation, any particular slides, or try and understand more about it?
So comments from committee members? Sarah and then Gary?
Sure. I just had a quick question because I looked over it, before the meeting was, how do we best, so like if I decided I'm going to host a meeting, let's say, and I go through it, what's the best way to then after communicate any feedback back to the consultants? Is there a clear channel, or is it like, I know part of it is to give the information out to the public, but what we get from them in terms of, like if I give it to neighbors, or let's say, what's the process aside from sharing on social media and those kind of things? How do we directly get, or what is the information that is the most instructive for the consultants?
Okay, sorry, the first thing I thought you were asking is how to give the feedback. And there's this form. Can you see this? I'm hovering over it now. Did I share the correct document? Yeah. So you just click on that and it goes to a Google Docs. Committee members might remember from the night of the open house, they used a thing called Google Jamboards. Effectively, that's what this is. So you can collect all kinds of information, and this is kind of at the discretion of each person giving it to some extent. You can collect the people's opinions, their feedback, their fears, their hopes for what might come from the Coastal Resilience Plan. You can also collect personal information if you want, email addresses, so that people can be included for outreach as needed in the future. So that's one way of doing it. But this is just kind of a basic information pack. And hopefully the FAQs would answer an awful lot of what you're asking, Sarah. And I'm sorry that I didn't have that available until yesterday.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. For the Google form, that goes automatically. That's like the Google form that's shared with the Google Drive of the consultants. And
correct.
So,
it's what they set up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, and Gary?
So first of all, I want to say I think it's a fabulous, spectacular way of providing this information to these various communities. Really, really great. However, I have two questions. The first one, with respect to the map pieces, my question is, are they clear enough so that people who are looking at that will understand what that means, where it shows, those red areas in 2050 or 2100? Yeah, those are, yeah. So the question is, when we show those to all of the lay people, will they understand what that means? Is there a way that, I don't know if the frequently asked questions will help us respond to what it means when you see red there and when you see red in 2050 or 2100 or 2200. So that's the first question. The second question is, when people look at this, they'll be very impressed with all of the thinking that's going on. And then they're going to get very personal and to say, now, if it's already March or April when they see this presentation, and you're going to complete the Coastal Resilience Plan in September, so you must be thinking about what you're going to do with my neighborhood. So tell me what you're planning to do about, or what you're working on with respect to the issues in my neighborhood, because you only have a few months to produce the plan. And how do we respond to that?
Good question.
Thank you, Gary. Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you. Great questions, Gary. So the first one here about the maps. So I guess I'm just so used to seeing these things, I thought they would be self-explanatory. So this is a 1% annual storm today, present day in Nantucket. If we had a 1 in 100 year storm, this is the areas that would be likely to flood. You move into 2070, after 50 years of sea level rise, these are the areas that are likely to flood. It just goes further inland. That's the purpose of what this is trying to show. I wonder, yeah, this could probably do it being some bit clearer.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Gary. There's nothing that says specifically that the orange area is the area that's at risk of flooding. And if you go back to the slide before this, Vince. No, the one, yeah, that one. Looking at this, I found it confusing that some areas are water that are colored orange and some areas are land that are colored orange. And just looking at this, it looks like maybe it's a soils map with green is a certain thing and orange is a certain thing and white is a certain thing. It wasn't clear, if I know nothing about the coastal resilience plan, it wasn't clear what this map was trying to communicate. So I'd like to see that delineated a little bit better.
And they may ask about what the degree of impact. It says the areas that will have impacts from flooding. Will that mean that the property will no longer be viable for use? Or is it just going to be occasional flooding? How do they understand that?
That's another good point. Do you get your feet wet or does your house fall into the ocean?
Yeah, so this is just during a storm. So these are the areas that flood during a storm. So after a storm, water typically recedes, and then you can use the property again. So these are at risk of flooding in a 100-year storm. So then the other question about how deep the water is. So this is moving from risk to level of damage, which isn't in these maps. You'd need to look much closer in. So I'm just going to go down and look at the zoomed in ones just for the downtown area. So this just shows how far water goes. The simple things to take away from this, that if your house is here and then suddenly after 80 years of sea level rise, you know your house is going to get flooded during a storm. That's about as much as you can take from it. Oh, no, wait, I beg your pardon. This is from sea level rise, not during storms.
And again, so that, yeah, looking at this slide, just, no, so that one, it doesn't seem truthful because we know that on a sunny day, high tide, Easy Street is flooded, but that's not reflected on this map.
You can see red on it, it's just not very clear.
Well, you can, but it's not on the street. It's not going up Oak Street. It's not on Broad Street, but we know those areas would have water on them on a high tide.
Mary, I think this is most likely the average, right? Mean high tides, not the highest high tides of the year possible. So I don't know.
Well, it does say, I'm sorry, Jen, it does say mean higher high water.
Yes, and that is an average over the entire year. So it's the average of those highest. So it's not the absolute highest.
Okay. Again, if I'm coming at this a position of knowing nothing, I find it to be confusing, whether it's because of not understanding the terminology or that what I'm seeing doesn't match my experience and can't match the experience to the parameters, you know. I don't know that this one in particular needs to be changed, but I'm sort of noting the potential for confusion with the public.
Or maybe a definition of what mean higher high water is.
Yeah. Well, a layman's definition, because it has a definition inherent in the words, if you know what they mean.
I think if I can, Mary, one of the strengths of this is that whatever we display on here, we're going to have to pick a point in time and a tide height, and we can't display everything. But as you said, we know these areas. So, you know, if we have clarity on the words so that we're speaking with everyone and can make it accessible to everyone, I absolutely agree that's great. I think layperson definitions for terms is really an excellent idea. But I also think we can use our experience and what we know of a place to talk about it when we're doing the presentation. So you could show it and say, you know, this is a definition and what's often used for, you know, regulatory definitions of flooding, but we know that this is what happens, you know, downtown and on these places when we have extreme high tides or we have wind coupled with high tides and those kinds of things. So we can speak from our experience when we show the figures, but I don't think that we'll ever be able to have every point of data that we want to encapsulate in the presentation, just because there's so many pieces.
I think that's a really good point, Jen, is that you can't just throw this slide up on the screen and say, here's the next slide and the next slide and read your script. You really need to pause and allow the audience to react and respond with you know, your kind of boots on the ground, real world perspective when you're doing a presentation of this. So thank you for pointing that out. Peter, you had a comment?
Yes, Vince, there's enough room on this slide for a little box that could be color coded. And if you have a height, a water height during a storm, and orange is what you're showing now, you might have another color that shows water going up Oak Street and Broad Street and down Washington Street. So people get it. They get that, you know, how it's going to go up. Because I look at this and I'm like, well, I know what's going to happen because I've been here almost 30 years and I've reported on this. But, you know, people in Gary's group who may not be as engaged, if Gary gives such a presentation to them, he's going to need to explain. He'll get those questions. So,
can I just, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I just go down a few slides and see what people think of the next maps? And I also saw Ian had a question.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed that. Ian, go ahead. And I have a comment before you leave that map.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's just that Peter took the words out of my mouth, more or less. I would have thought that another color that, you know, Broad Street, if it doesn't make it too confusing with for Broad, Easy, and Washington, for, as Jen said, you know, during a nor'easter with the right phase of the moon and enough wind, we've all seen them flood. And as Peter said, there is enough room for another color and another explanation if we wanted to go in that direction. Thank you. Without adding to Vince's work case. Too bad. Thank you.
This one is easy for me, Ian. I just have to make the suggestion to Arcadis.
Yeah. So yeah, I would point out there are always three cases, and we need to be clear about which case we're talking about. There's the average tide, which is simply due to sea level. There is the highest tide, which is still a sunny day tide, and there's a storm tide. And I think it's good to make sure that we are that whoever we're talking to knows which one of those cases we're talking about. And then I have a little quibble, and that is the label Nantucket Ferry. We're already on Nantucket. There is no ferry to Nantucket from Nantucket. I would relabel that as Steamboat Wharf, which is what everybody here is familiar with. That Nantucket Ferry does not make sense to us here. Other comments from the committee?
Vince, the second question of mine, which is when people say, so what exactly are you planning for our neighborhood or my street or this particular issue, if you only have 3 or 4 months before the plan is going to be produced?
Yeah. So beg your pardon, and I'm sorry I forgot that part of the question, Gary. Thank you for bringing it back. So at the moment, this is going to be presented and might be updated at a point later. But where Arcadis are at the moment is they're finishing their risk assessment. After they've done with the risk assessment, they're going to start looking at possible methods to deal with that. So simple answer is they're not there yet. Everyone wants to know what the next step is and what's going to be the answer. So we're in what, early March. We've got the better part of 6.5 months before we'll see delivery. Just so that everyone is aware, at some point, probably June, I've said this before, there's going to be the next public engagement where they're going to present some of the ideas that might be looked at for implementation. So they'll understand the risk, they'll look at what might be done, and then they're going to start, for want of a better term, flying kites, see what sticks, see what people don't like, see what people absolutely hate, or what people do like and what might be acceptable to the community. So that's kind of the next phase, and we're really looking at late May at the very earliest for that. So I'm sorry, Gary, I just don't have an answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Vince. Other comments? Okay, Vince, you had mentioned wanting to move on to a different part of this presentation to show us something.
Thank you, Mary. Very briefly, I'm just going to stop sharing that and go and find the correct one I want to find next. So it's something I've already just mentioned. It's the bilingual nature of this. This is also available in Spanish, and Spanish presenters can take this as well, present to communities in Spanish and give feedback in Spanish, because they can do that in Arcadis now. They can take that and bring it to a useful point in the CRP. This will change, if anything in this changes in the English version, the Spanish version will change to match it. Arcadis have in-house translator for this.
That's great.
Yeah, the FAQ document and the storytelling cards are also in Spanish, and that can, both versions and all 3 documents, or 6 total, can be made available to the entire committee once I get these little updates changed.
All right, thank you, Vince. Any further comment on the meeting in a, or what do they call it, in a meeting in a box kit? Yes, Jen.
I just wanted to ask, you know, when it's ready, is there a procedure for notifying you that we're planning on doing it and advertising? You know, just should we step through the committee if, you know, say I want to take it back to the, you know, NCF board or open it up to our membership and run a workshop on it?
Or there'll be like a downloadable version of all 6 documents on the CRP website. This will be just something people can go and get and use themselves. This is a public-facing document that is intended for any group that wants to learn more or give a presentation. It's not just for CRAC members. It's primarily for if CRAC members want to, but anyone from the public can take this and use it.
Yeah, I would say that there's no permission or notification necessary, but we'd love to hear a report on how it went. I think would be the way to look at it. And speaking of which, that's coming up. I want to pause and see if there's any public comment on this or any other issue before the committee, before we move on to committee reports. So if you have a public comment, use the raise your hand feature or unmute yourself and let us know that you have something to ask. Okay, seeing none. So committee reports. So Trevor and Vince and I did do a presentation to Nantucket Equity Advocates to get their advice on how we can reach out to members of the community that we don't normally get an opportunity to reach. You know, in particular, the Hispanic community in all of its various forms and the Black community in all of its various forms on Nantucket. Vince, did Trevor have anything that he wanted to communicate after that? We did get some good ideas from them.
No, not really. There was one thing that I think was it Brooke Moore said. You might be able to correct me on this, Mary. It really stuck with me, and I was thinking, it makes it into an uphill battle when you're trying to reach people in the Spanish-speaking community. And one of the reasons why most everyone has trouble with engagement, not looking for an excuse in this, but it is something I hadn't considered at all. Partly my fault on this one. Most of the people in the Spanish-speaking community have 2-3 jobs, and their free time was limited, and they just wouldn't hear about it because they're working. So I'm paraphrasing that poorly, I'm sure,
But I think that's not limited to the Spanish-speaking community.
Yep.
There's a very large number of people in Nantucket that don't have time for public engagement normally. And the question is, well, how can we reach the few that might be interested if they knew about it, regardless of what community they're in? I do see a hand up from Liz Trios. Liz, if you want to go ahead, I don't know if you have a comment here or a previous public comment.
Yes, it is about this circulating this entire thing with the Spanish and Black community. I think you really need to go to the churches to promote this. That would be the best thing because they all go to church. That you can be sure, most, or I should say most of them. And that would be the best place to do this sort of presentation and get these people involved. So you might want to think about that. Thank you.
That was advice that we got from Nantucket Equity Advocates as well, was that they weren't aware of any groups that represented those particular communities other than their involvement with the church.
Exactly.
So we have to figure that out somehow.
I'm sure if you get in touch with the different group, the head group in the churches, if you call the church and you get involved, you learn the people to get involved with. That I think will be very helpful.
Thank you, Liz. Other comments in terms of, well, let me go ahead with the other group. So I was asked by Rick Atherton to do a presentation on the Coastal Resilience Plan for a group that's called the Winter Group, essentially 24 or so people that get together for a lunchtime session as they go through the winter. And I was happy to do that. I didn't have this meeting in a box kit, but I did something pretty similar. It was just showing the resources that are available on the town's website and on some of the other resilience efforts. There was a Resilient Nantucket and the Envision Resilience Challenge, just making sure they were aware of those, talking about the goals for the plan, and listening to their ideas. So I was able to do that. It was a pleasant hour on Zoom. And I'm open to doing that for other groups. If you are a member of a group, but you individually don't want to do the presentation, reach out and perhaps I would be able to assist with that. I'm happy to give that a shot. Other committee reports. So we did have Ian's note from last time about the Concom with their SBPF review coming up. That was noted in the minutes of February 23rd. So that comment period is open until March 12th. And I don't know, Ian, if there's anything further to add on that.
Not on that, Madam Chair, but Joseph Topham announced at our last meeting that he is not re-upping this year. So I would urge my fellow CRAC members to try and, thrash the undergrowth and get people to apply. So.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Matt?
The town had the preliminary discussion with Arcadis about the Baxter Road study that's underway, the resiliency that we'll be doing there. Sort of point that tie in with this, Vince will be involved. Timing wise, we're going to figure out, how to do it alongside, the resiliency that's going on. A lot of the questions we had here were they understood or answered or understand moving forward. And, I think it was a good first step to hopefully unstick that situation a little bit.
Great, thank you, Matt. Other committee reports? Right, seeing none, new business. So just repeating on the agenda, our upcoming meeting dates and the opportunities to sign up for notifications and Climate Change Awareness Month coming in September. Does anybody have any updates on potential topics for future meetings or anything else related under new business? Sarah?
Hi, I had circulated to Vince a few things that came up out of our old education subcommittee. And so there are two different things that are options for us to consider. I'm not really, necessarily pushing either one. It's kind of whatever the group is interested in. And so the first one was that I was actually specifically asked by the land bank if we could put together a page basically that was, sorry, I'm looking at my notes and so I can't see everyone. But it was basically a one-page document of the science that's being used on Nantucket. And it was kind of basically a reference sheet to be used for that we could include whatever we want to on it, but going a little bit more in depth than the recommendation to the select board. So basically like the sea level rise and the sea level rise scenarios and the citations and the erosion and the citations. And so a bunch of different things. And I don't have all the information, which is why I sound like I'm rambling. It was kind of like, if we decide to go down this route, we can decide what the best information would be on there. When we had our education subcommittee, this is something Graham had mentioned as well, in a similar vein of a sort of one-page document that was a quick way for someone who already has some level of information and is looking for it. So it's not meant to be, let's say, someone who doesn't have any information about coastal resiliency, and that's obviously what a lot of what we've been talking about for education, but to kind of circulate around for people who are already sort of interested and maybe looking for a direct, kind of citation list and some of the main science that's happening on Nantucket. I think as the education subcommittee, when we did kind of a cursory look at what materials were available in other communities, there were some similar documents like that had kind of neat infographics too to help show some of the information about like, how many acres might be lost or whatever it was. So I'm not necessarily proposing that we definitely do that. That was one thing that was proposed. And if we did go down that route of wanting to discuss it, we could discuss as a group what is included in such a page and who the direct audience is. That's one option. I have a second option, but I didn't know if there's any questions on that before I move on.
Well, I think you have a good point about producing something for a professional or scientific audience that includes the specific science reporting that we're relying on. I think that's a really great idea. But I think probably somebody would have to come up with a draft for us to start from rather than as a committee trying to create it piecemeal.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal, so some of this, the next bullet point is in a similar framework where it's something for us to produce, and either any one of us could kind of come up with a draft, or a small group of us could kind of circulate a draft by email to present to the group. But we dissolved the education subcommittee because of the, we had lots of reasons to do that. So I think this is another way for us to kind of continue to put all the things that we're learning together and have some summarized output that we can be doing while we're waiting for the full plan to come out.
Just a reminder to coordinate that kind of an email chain through Vince, not between each other. Jen, you had a comment?
There we go. Thanks, Mary. Can you guys hear? Okay, there we go. Sorry, it was telling me I was still muted. I was just gonna say I could see the worth of putting together an educational document that like takes the science and makes it accessible. Something that helps say, okay, like we were just saying, mean high water, like the kinds of terms that we're using and what that is and how it applies on Nantucket. As far as just putting together a sheet that has the citations of what we're doing, that almost sounds like we're trying to justify the science that we're doing. And I don't know that we need to do that. I think that will come in the CRP. And I think that, stating the sources that we use within the CRP will justify the science that we're doing. But I think if we're going to produce something separate, it should be more on that educational side of things.
Thank you, Jen. Other comments? Vince?
Just to offer to help any committee member to put this together in some format and show what Arcadis are going to be using, Arcadis and subcommittee members and partners are using. So I'm happy to be involved or assist whoever wants to take the lead on it.
Great, thank you, Vince. I do see that Deanne Atherton has her hand up. Deanne, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Just briefly, I was speaking to a member of the land bank staff this past week and understand that they have engaged the Woods Hole group to develop a coastal resiliency plan for them, I believe along Easy Street and Washington Street. I'm not sure about the specifics, but I thought that was interesting, and it should be coordinated with what we're doing, you know, island wide, and perhaps inviting someone from the land bank to talk about what they're doing with you would be helpful.
Thank you, Deanne. Vince, if you want to address that, and I will just remind everybody, we did have the land bank come and talk about their general ideas for coastal resilience on their properties. And we are aware that they are now looking at a more specific plan. And I expect that we will be coordinating with that, but Vince can have more details.
Well, you're exactly right, Mary. And I think, was it this day 2 weeks ago or this day 4 weeks ago? I don't remember which. I mentioned it at this committee, at this meeting, that the land bank were undertaking this effort, and that it was specific to their properties and how to manage their properties into the future, and with their with their goals in mind as a land bank. So there are some pretty significant differences. I've been chatting with various staff at the land bank, and yes, we're going to work together on it. The presentation is something that I brought up in a kind of a casual way, but I'm happy to explore that idea more with land bank staff. And I think the only thing that they're waiting on is that it's 100% finalized. I don't know that a contract has been signed yet. They'd have to wait for that first.
Thank you.
But thank you, Deanne. Happy to explore that one.
Great. Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Deanne. So any further comments on committee reports? Yes, Sarah. I'm sorry,
I wasn't
reports, but new business. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't totally done with the other proposal. So aside from the science kind of sheet that was proposed, the other option that I'm actually personally more interested in is creating a recommendation for homeowners for landscaping with climate change in mind. There's lots of great resources available throughout the country and the state, but it would be great to put that together with some of the efforts, you know, with more island specific. So there's lots of different options of directions that could go, whether it's just, you know, dealing with water or dealing specifically with sea level rise, and making plant recommendations. And I think obviously on this committee, we have lots of expertise, but we also have a lot of local expertise to tap into. And there's various efforts of planting with natives that are going around the island. So I think that it would be kind of a, not easy to do, but I think that it would be, there would be a lot of interest from homeowners in not just, you know, we produced with the one about protecting your home, but thinking about the landscape is something that a lot of people can do. So that's a second proposal that was put forth for this committee to potentially work on.
And I think that was Ava Ron's interest as well. So that, you know, there is already interest in that. Other ideas for upcoming meeting topics. I did confirm with Envision Resilience for March 23rd's meeting. They will present the results of their survey. And we are working on a couple other things as well, but, you know, always open to suggestions from members about topics that we can include in our meeting agendas. If there's no other comment on new business, I included some of the reminders at the bottom of the agenda for downloading the app, looking at the previous open house recording, signing up for notifications about the Coastal Resilience Plan, those I think will be perennially on our agendas from now on, so that if the public should happen to stumble across them, they will have those resources. And if anybody has suggestions for other things we should put there, I'm happy to add those in too. If there is nothing else, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I moved.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Gary. So all those in favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Ram Durovich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks, March 23rd.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.